Hello, everyone. My name doesn't matter anymore, but my story does. Thank you for being here and listening with an open heart. For many years, I lived a double life that looked ordinary on the outside, but was dark and calculated underneath. Today, I'm not here to entertain you. I'm here to confess. I was once deeply involved in witchcraft, and one of my main roles was helping divert people's money before it ever reached their hands. You may think money loss is just bad luck or poor timing, but I know how intentional it can be. I'm speaking now because silence kept me powerful, and truth took that power away. What I share is not rumor or imagination, it is lived experience. I greet you not as a teacher, but as a former deceiver who finally chose to step into the light and expose how it truly worked. I didn't start out wanting to hurt anyone. That's something people rarely believe, but it's true. At first, I was curious, then desperate, then ambitious. I was told witchcraft was about energy, balance, and manifestation. But beneath those soft words was a system built on control, fear, and exchange. Money was one of the easiest things to manipulate because people already worry about it. We were trained to watch patterns. Who was about to receive a promotion, an inheritance, a business breakthrough. Whenever abundance was close, that's when we acted. The goal wasn't always to make ourselves rich directly, but to block, delay, or redirect what didn't belong to us in the first place. The truth is, money diversion didn't look like someone waving a wand and stealing cash. It was subtle, strategic, and psychological. We believed money carried spiritual permission. If someone was confident, hopeful, and focused, their permission was strong. So our first task was to weaken that permission. We used rituals designed to introduce confusion, doubt, or distraction. Sometimes it worked through dreams, sometimes through sudden emotional heaviness. The moment a person questioned their direction or felt fear about finances, we believed the flow had cracks. That's when diversion became possible. Looking back now, I realize how cruel it was to intentionally target people at their most vulnerable moments. One of the most disturbing parts was how organized it all was. This wasn't chaos, it was structure. There were meetings, hierarchies, and assignments. Some people specialized in relationships, others in health, and some of us focused purely on finances. We kept journals, dates, and names. When someone was about to receive money, we didn't always know the source, but we sensed the timing. Promotions would suddenly be delayed, deals would collapse at the last minute, or emergencies would appear out of nowhere. At the time, we celebrated these outcomes as success. We told ourselves we were just redirecting energy. Now I understand we were celebrating real people's losses. What haunts me the most is how personal it became. We didn't see people as human beings We saw them as targets or opportunities. I remember being assigned to a woman who was about to receive a large settlement after years of legal struggle. Instead of feeling compassion, I felt excitement. We performed rituals meant to stir conflict around her. Arguments with lawyers, paperwork errors, sudden health issues. When the settlement was delayed indefinitely, my group praised me. That night, I couldn't sleep, not because of guilt yet, but because something inside me felt unnaturally cold, like I was slowly losing the ability to feel normal empathy. People often ask if we knew we were serving evil. At the time, we didn't use that word. Evil sounded dramatic, outdated. We used words like power, alignment, and exchange. But there was always a cost. Every successful diversion required something in return. Sometimes money, sometimes sleep, sometimes peace. I began to notice that while others lost finances, I was losing myself. Anxiety became constant. Nightmares increased. I felt watched even when I was alone. The power I thought I was gaining was hollow, and it demanded more the longer I stayed. There were rules we followed closely. One rule was never to touch money directly after a working. We believed diverted money carried spiritual residue, and handling it too soon would bring consequences. Another rule was secrecy, absolute silence. Even within families, we lied. We pretended success was luck, intelligence, or manifestation. But deep inside, we knew it wasn't clean. We were trained to disconnect cause from conscience. If someone's business failed after our work, we blamed their mindset, not our actions. That lie protected us for a while, but lies like that rot you from the inside. I remember the first time I questioned everything. It wasn't during a ritual. It was during a normal day. I was standing in line at a grocery store when I overheard a man on the phone saying his bank account was frozen unexpectedly. His voice cracked when he said he didn't know how he'd feed his kids that week. My chest tightened. I had heard that tone before, in reports, in celebrations, in whispered confirmations. That moment forced a connection I had avoided for years. These weren't abstract outcomes. These were families' futures and faith being shaken because of things I helped do. After that, the work became heavier. Rituals that once felt empowering now felt invasive. I started hesitating, missing steps, questioning instructions. That's dangerous in those circles. Doubt is seen as betrayal. I was warned that leaving would come with consequences. That once you open certain doors, you can't simply walk away. Fear kept me silent, but my conscience was louder than before. Every diverted opportunity replayed in my mind. Every delayed blessing felt like a weight I was carrying on behalf of someone else's pain. The leaders always told us we were chosen, that we were smarter than ordinary people. That flattery is powerful. It makes you believe you're above morality. But something shifted when I realized how replaceable I was. The moment I questioned orders, I was no longer special. I became a liability. That's when I understood this system never cared about me either. It consumed loyalty and discarded doubt. Watching how quickly admiration turned into suspicion showed me the truth. There was no protection here, only control dressed up as power. I want you to understand something important. Most victims never knew they were targeted. They blamed themselves, the economy, bad timing, or even God. That's what makes this so devastating. When money was diverted, faith was often shaken too. People asked, "Why is this happening to me?" While we stood in the background feeling accomplished. That memory still makes my stomach turn. If you've ever felt blocked right before a breakthrough, I'm not saying this is always the reason, but I am saying manipulation, like this is real, and I was once part of it. This is only the beginning of my confession. I haven't yet told you how I tried to leave, what followed me afterward, or how everything finally collapsed. What I've shared so far is just the surface of a system designed to stay hidden. In the next part, I'll tell you what happens when someone inside decides to walk away, and why exposing this truth nearly cost me everything. If you're still listening, thank you. Your attention is not small. Sometimes listening is the first step toward breaking cycles that were never meant to continue. After that grocery store moment, I began noticing things I had trained myself to ignore. The silence after rituals felt louder than before, like something waiting for me to speak first. I started waking up at the same hour every night, my heart racing, my mind replaying faces of people I had never met but somehow knew were affected. The fear I once used as fuel was now turned inward. I realized the system thrived on that fear. It kept us obedient. When fear works, it convinces you that staying is safer than leaving, even when staying is destroying you slowly. I tried to rationalize my involvement by telling myself that everyone was responsible for their own outcomes. That was a common excuse we shared. But the more I repeated it, the emptier it sounded. I knew how much preparation went into targeting someone's finances. I knew how intentional it was. We didn't just influence energy. We interfered with moments that mattered. Birthdays ruined by sudden bills, businesses collapsing right before expansion, generosity turning into scarcity. These weren't coincidences to me anymore. They were consequences of deliberate actions I helped carry out. One night, during a ritual meant to block a business transfer, something went wrong. Or maybe it went right. I froze mid-process. My hands were shaking, and for the first time, I said nothing. Silence broke the rhythm. The others noticed immediately. There was anger, confusion, and then suspicion. I was questioned aggressively afterward, not with concern, but with threat. I was reminded of everything I would lose if I stopped cooperating. Community, protection, favor. They said the world outside would reject me. That fear almost worked. From that point on, I was watched, not in an obvious way, but in the subtle ways that make you doubt your own thoughts. Conversations felt monitored. Messages carried double meanings. I was assigned smaller tasks, as if they were testing my loyalty. Financial workings continued without me, but I was forced to witness the results. People losing contracts, sudden audits, unexpected thefts. I felt complicit even when I wasn't directly involved. The guilt didn't fade, it multiplied. I began to realize how deeply money was tied to identity in this system. Taking from others wasn't just about wealth, it was about dominance. When someone's finances collapsed, their confidence often followed. We believed that breaking financial stability weakened spiritual resistance. That belief justified everything we did. But watching it from the outside, even briefly, showed me how predatory it truly was. We weren't powerful. We were parasitic, feeding on uncertainty and calling it control. There was a moment when I seriously considered staying forever just to survive. Leaving meant isolation, retaliation, and uncertainty. Staying meant numbness and decay. I was torn between fear and conscience. What pushed me closer to leaving wasn't bravery. It was exhaustion. I was tired of pretending I didn't feel anything. Tired of celebrating loss. Tired of carrying secrets that poisoned every normal interaction. I wanted rest, not power. I started pulling away quietly. I stopped attending optional meetings. I delayed responses. I made excuses. Each small act of distance felt dangerous, but also relieving. The more space I created, the clearer my thoughts became. I noticed how often we were reminded not to question, not to doubt, not to think independently. Control doesn't need chains, it needs compliance. And I was slowly withdrawing mine. The financial diversions continued without me, but I could still feel the echoes. It's hard to explain, but once you've been part of something like that, you sense its movements. I could feel when something was being blocked, when pressure was applied. That awareness became unbearable. I felt responsible even when I wasn't participating. That's when I understood there was no clean way to exit quietly. Silence would still make me complicit. One night alone, I spoke out loud for the first time in years. Not a spell, not an intention, just words. I admitted what I had done. I didn't ask for power or protection. I asked for release. That moment didn't feel dramatic. It felt fragile. But something shifted. The fear didn't disappear instantly, but it loosened its grip. For the first time, I felt like I was choosing honesty over survival. The aftermath wasn't immediate, but it was intense. Relationships fell apart quickly. People who once praised me turned cold. Opportunities vanished. I was warned indirectly to stay silent. Financial pressure hit me hard, almost like retaliation. Ironically, I experienced the same instability I had once helped create. That was humbling. I understood deeply what it felt like to lose footing without explanation. That experience changed me more than any ritual ever did. I don't share this to claim innocence. I'm responsible for my actions. I share it because secrecy keeps systems like this alive. When people don't talk, patterns repeat. When victims blame themselves, manipulators stay hidden. I lived on both sides of that divide. I know how convincing the illusion can be and how devastating the reality is underneath it. If you're listening to this and remembering moments when things fell apart right before they were supposed to come together, I won't tell you exactly why, but I will tell you this: not every loss is your fault, and not every delay means you're failing. Sometimes unseen interference exists. Sometimes exposure is the first step toward freedom, not just for individuals, but for systems that depend on silence. In the next part, I'll tell you how I finally broke away completely, what followed me afterward, and why speaking now is still risky, but necessary. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't ask for trust. I only ask that you listen carefully. Truth doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it comes as a confession, spoken by someone who knows exactly how deep the deception once went. Leaving completely didn't happen all at once. It happened in layers, like peeling something that had fused itself to my identity. The first layer was silence. I stopped responding altogether. The second was distance. I moved, changed routines, erased patterns. The third was truth. I began admitting to myself that I had been wrong. That was the hardest part. Walking away from witchcraft wasn't just about quitting practices. It was about dismantling beliefs that told me I was entitled to interfere with other people's lives. Every step forward felt like I was walking without armor, exposed to consequences I had been warned about for years. Almost immediately, strange things started happening around me. Objects would go missing and reappear. I'd hear my name whispered when no one was there. Dreams became vivid, relentless, replaying past rituals in reverse, as if my mind was trying to undo what my hands once did. Fear tried to reclaim me. I was told these experiences meant I should come back, that I was being punished for stepping out of alignment. But something in me refused to accept that explanation anymore. Fear had ruled me long enough. What surprised me most was how empty the promises of power felt once I stopped believing them. For years, I had been told that without protection, I would fail financially, emotionally, spiritually. Yet as I stepped away, even with instability, I felt more grounded than ever before. I struggled, yes, but it was an honest struggle. Every bill I paid, every setback I faced, felt real in a way my previous success never did. There was dignity in earning without manipulation. I began researching, not spells, not rituals, but people. I listened to testimonies of others who had left similar paths. Their stories echoed mine: the control, the fear, the isolation. I realized this wasn't unique to me. Systems like this thrive on secrecy and superiority. Once you step outside, you see how many others were trapped the same way. That realization gave me courage. I wasn't weak for leaving. I was reclaiming something human. The guilt didn't vanish just because I left. In fact, it intensified. I started remembering specific moments, names, dates, outcomes. I remembered celebrating someone's loss because it validated my skill. That memory still makes me physically sick. I can't undo what I did, but I can refuse to protect the system that taught me to celebrate harm. Speaking now is part of that refusal. Silence would be easier, but it would also be dishonest. I started noticing changes in how I thought about money. Before, money was leverage, proof of dominance. Now it became responsibility. I understood how fragile financial stability really is and how devastating it can be when it's disrupted without warning. I saw money not as energy to control, but as a tool that affects real lives. That shift alone felt like repentance in action. My mindset changed before my circumstances ever did. There were moments when I feared retaliation, financial collapse, illness, isolation. Some of those fears came true in small ways. I lost work. Friendships disappeared. But what didn't happen was what I had been promised would happen. I wasn't destroyed. I wasn't erased. I wasn't consumed. The fear had been exaggerated to keep me compliant. Realizing that broke something fundamental inside me. The illusion of inevitability. I want to be clear, walking away didn't instantly make life peaceful. Healing is not dramatic, it's repetitive. It's choosing honesty over comfort every single day. It's resisting the urge to explain away the past. It's accepting that some people will never know what happened behind the scenes. That humility was new to me. Power had made me arrogant. Loss made me attentive. As I rebuilt my life, I noticed something subtle but profound. Opportunities began arriving without manipulation. Small ones at first, conversations, chances, trust. They weren't guaranteed or stolen, they were offered. That difference mattered. I no longer felt like I had to force outcomes. For the first time, I allowed things to unfold without interference. That patience felt foreign, but freeing. Sometimes I wonder about the people whose finances were affected by my actions. I don't know their names, but I carry the awareness of them with me. If you're one of those people unknowingly impacted, I'm sorry. I can't return what was lost, but I can expose how it was taken. Truth doesn't restore money, but it can restore clarity. And clarity is powerful. Telling this story publicly is not safe or comfortable. There are still people who benefit from keeping these systems hidden. But fear no longer owns my voice. I am speaking because exposure disrupts cycles. When deception is named, it loses strength. And when one person steps out, others begin questioning too. That's how systems collapse, not through force, but through awareness. This is not the end of my story, and it's not the end of this confession. In the next part, I'll share what finally severed the remaining ties, how faith entered my life unexpectedly, and why I believe restoration is possible even after deep involvement in darkness. If you're still here, thank you for listening. Sometimes the path back begins with hearing a truth you were never meant to know, but needed to hear anyway. What finally severed the remaining ties wasn't confrontation or escape. It was surrender. I stopped trying to manage outcomes altogether. For years, I had believed control was survival, that if I didn't steer events, something terrible would happen. Letting go felt like stepping off a ledge without knowing what was below. But that release broke the last invisible thread binding me to the system. I wasn't fighting it anymore, and without resistance, it had nothing to feed on. That realization was quiet, but decisive. Faith entered my life unexpectedly, not through argument or pressure, but through presence. I encountered it in conversations where no one tried to convince me of anything, in moments of stillness where I felt seen without being evaluated. It wasn't fear-based or transactional. There were no exchanges, no demands, no threats of loss. That contrast alone shook me. I had lived inside systems that always asked for something in return. This didn't. It offered rest, not power. I began to understand how deeply fear had shaped my decisions. Fear of lack, fear of insignificance, fear of being ordinary. Witchcraft had promised exceptionality, but at the cost of peace. Faith offered something humbler and far stronger. It allowed me to exist without performing, without manipulating, without constantly proving worth. That shift didn't erase my past, but it reframed it. I stopped seeing myself as someone who fell from power and started seeing myself as someone who finally chose freedom. Restoration didn't arrive dramatically. It came in fragments. A job that paid just enough, a conversation that felt honest, sleep without nightmares. These were small mercies, but they accumulated. For the first time, progress didn't feel stolen or fragile. It felt earned and stable. I learned to celebrate slow growth instead of instant results. That patience healed parts of me I didn't know were damaged. I also learned to forgive myself, not by excusing what I did, but by taking responsibility and choosing differently every day. Guilt can either immobilize you or instruct you. I let it instruct me. It taught me boundaries, humility, and empathy. I no longer saw people as outcomes to influence, but as lives to respect. That change alone felt like a reversal of everything I had once believed. There were still moments of fear, moments when old thoughts tried to resurface, but they no longer had authority. I learned to question them instead of obeying them. I learned that thoughts lose power when they're exposed to light. Silence had once been my shield. Now it was my enemy. Speaking carefully, truthfully, became part of my healing. I want you to understand that systems like the one I left don't collapse because of force. They collapse because people stop believing the lies that sustain them. When fear loses credibility, control dissolves. When secrecy breaks, manipulation weakens. That's why telling this story matters. Not to sensationalize darkness, but to demystify it. Darkness thrives on mystery. Truth strips it of that advantage. If you've ever felt like something was working against you without explanation, I'm not here to define your experience for you. I'm here to tell you that interference is real, and so is restoration. Loss does not define your worth. Delay does not mean denial, and confusion does not mean failure. Sometimes it means someone else was trying to write your story for you. Awareness gives that pen back. I don't expect everyone to believe me. Skepticism is reasonable. I once hid behind it myself. But if even one person listens and stops blaming themselves for something that was never their fault, this confession has served its purpose. Exposure isn't about revenge. It's about release, for me and possibly for you. My life now is quieter, smaller maybe by some standards, but it's honest. I wake up without needing to calculate outcomes or protect secrets. I earn what I have. I accept what I don't. That simplicity is something no ritual ever gave me. Power promised everything and delivered anxiety. Truth promised nothing and delivered peace. If you're still listening, thank you for staying through this entire story. Attention is an act of respect, and I don't take it lightly. This confession doesn't end with a warning. It ends with an invitation to question what you've been told, to examine what you fear, to choose clarity over control. This was my path back, not to power, not to dominance, but to humanity. And if there's one thing I know now, it's this: nothing stolen ever sustains, and nothing honest ever truly disappears. Whatever was diverted can be restored in ways you may not yet see. And sometimes restoration begins with someone finally telling the truth.